John Beaudin, Rock History Book. How is everyone tonight? Strange anniversary, interesting anniversary. The uh, the night, that everyone says the day the music died, the Buddy Holly thing. To me, the biggest rock death was easily John Lennon. I remember being so traumatized by it. So and I said that I say this every year because I do a little thing every single year on usually our sister channel, our big channel, Rock History Music, which has 100 almost 106,000 subscribers. This one's a little smaller, but it's more of a today in history thing. So I thought I'd come on this channel and talk about the day that John Lennon was shot down, and people, everyone knows where they were. Who doesn't remember where they were when that happened? I know maybe a few of you who watch this channel on a regular basis might not have been born. Might have been sort of a new thing, that this whole Beatles thing. Remember a few years ago, the Kanye Paul McCartney thing, where people were going online saying, "Oh, it's so nice of Kanye to help this new artist Paul McCartney." Alex Knight. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate that. You're a good guy. Don't have my green screen today. Thought I'd leave it behind, but uh, it was just the strangest feeling. December 8th, 1980, and I remember I've never felt a feeling like that, and I think a lot of you might have been the same way. I mean, I was just looking up the list on Ranker from people going on and voting as far as their most the rock stars with the most untimely meetings with their maker, I guess you could say. Oh, Alex, you were in high school. Oh, yeah. I would just gotten out of high school for about a year and a half at that point, and it was just a shocking. The list, by the way, let's just go to the list before we talk about John Lennon again. The number one person is Freddie Mercury, who died in 1991, at the age of 45. Tom Petty's number two, and Tom Petty died in 2017. Jimi Hendrix is number three, died in 1970 at the age of 27. Of course, he's a member of that 27 club. Buddy Holly, there you go. 1959, age 22. Bob Marley, 1981, a year after John Lennon, at 36. Kurt Cobain, 1994, he was 27. David Bowie, that was a complete shock in 2016. Then John Lennon comes in at number 8, died in 1980. He was 40 years old. Jimmy Morrison's right behind him, passed away in 71 at 27. Then Prince, 2016. Stevie Ray Vaughan, he was only 35 years old. Stevie Ray Vaughan did look older than 35, but it's just the way, nurture nature, I don't know why. He died in 1990. And Chris Cornell, 2017 at 52. Elvis is on the list. He was 42, died in 77. So John Lennon was just 2 years younger. But tonight, as we just talk about that day, what were you doing? Have you come full circle? Some people tell me they've never really recovered from that death. It's always one where I think about that night. People were watching football, and then they announced it during the football game. Christopher Kreutz, you go to by the Dakota, it's still, oh yeah, you go by the Dakota, and it's like he still lives there. Yeah, the Dakota is where it happened, at the front entrance of where Yoko and John lived. And Sean, Alex Knight, it was my first big celebrity loss. JD, we have to learn to let go of the past. It's true, but it lives with us. I mean, there's a reason why when people mention December 8th, a lot of the times everyone kind of knows what that date means, right? Hotel California was released on December 8th. Did you know that? Yeah, we're going to do a thing after on Hotel California if we have time tonight, because it was such a big, groundbreaking album, but an interesting moment in time. Oops, I think I'm frozen here. I've got to relight this thing. There we go. Thank you. Anyway, the Ranker list is interesting to look at, where Jim Morrison's right underneath John Lennon, then Prince, who passed away in 2016. Like I said, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Chris Cornell, Elvis Presley, Otis Redding, Otis Redding passed away in 1967. It was December, so it was not the summer of love. Another member of the 27 Club, Janis Joplin, died in 1970. Johnny Cash, even though he was not a young man when he passed away. Marvin Gaye was shot by his dad. That was, I remember, in the 80s, 1984. Richie Valens, of course, in that plane crash. Buddy Holly, John Bonham, 1980. George Harrison in 2011. But there's one for me personally that really stands out. I try to come on and pay tribute to any, because this is more or less a Today in History channel. That's what Rock History Book is. That's what Rock History Book was going to be, literally a book. And it still may be based on a lot of the interviews that we've done through the years. But man, I remember where I was standing. I was in the corner. I had my records. Remember how everyone used to have those cement blocks? And they put they'd buy a board and put it on top and put the records in between. I was sitting on the floor on the right-hand side of the TV when my then girlfriend's brother called and let us know. And it came on the TV at the same time. JD, John Lennon died the way he did because he broke the Beatles for Yoko. Well, I don't know. He didn't die. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on from that comment. It was just a freak thing with the man with mental illness who was reading The Catcher in the Rye and had a lot of crazy ideas in his head. Mark David Chapman will probably never get out of jail. And they're saying now it's for his safety that if he was let out, someone would eventually make sure his demise was not too far around the corner. A lot of people talk about that kind of stuff. Would it happen? I don't know. It's hard to say because a lot of people are still, pretty unhappy about the way things went down with John Lennon. My first thought when it happened was, the Beatles won't get back together. Isn't that and I remember, I still think to this day, that's such a selfish thought for me, to think, the Beatles will never get back together. But it was true. And it's an unfortunate thing. Some more comments. Lewis says, I was at home and almost 10 years old. Very sad. Daryl Pike, I remember it. Fred C. Drummer, I just posted something about John Lennon on my Facebook page. Hard to forget it. It was the day before my birthday. Rest in peace, John. Well, happy birthday. You had a birthday yesterday. It's just a feeling for me that I had not felt before, like I said. It was just weird. It's such a strange thing to feel such loss with someone who chances are I would have never met or even interviewed. I've never interviewed a Beatle. I've interviewed a lot of people who've played with the Beatles, a lot, but not actually interviewed any of the four, or even Pete Best for that matter. Fred C. Drummer, I've already read that. Okay. Thanks for coming on, everybody. Every year we do a little thing for John. What could have been? Double Fantasy got bad reviews because it was released before he passed away. And it did get some, a lot of people thought it was lightweight, his last album, in case you don't know. But I didn't mind it. I was disappointed in Double Fantasy. I liked Woman. Starting Over, I thought, was a little light. But it was nice to have John back. He'd been gone for quite a while. And, he's finally back in the fold doing his thing. Alex says Double Fantasy was a nice comeback. And I bought it. I don't think No, I did buy it before he died. Yeah, I just remember that. Because a lot of people joined on. Of course, after he died. The album is shot up to #1. And all the Beatles albums came back on the charts. I finished my Beatles collection after he passed away. Chris says, I was 17 when Howard Cosell, it was Howard Cosell, said something about John Lennon being shot. I thought Howard was drunk. Yeah, that's right. It was Howard Cosell. He's long departed as well. It's just it's something that you can't process easily. And the David Bowie thing was very similar, where that happens and you go, what? And it's almost like your body's not prepared for it. A Beatle is someone who seems larger than life, just a guy, but seems larger than life, right? Daryl says, if John lived, we may have seen a Beatles reunion. Paul says it. Paul says it could have happened. Fred C. Drummer, my bucket list meet is actually Paul McCartney. Paul's always been my favorite Beatle as well. I'm more of a melody guy, and John was a more angst oriented. And but I like John. Obviously, I would say he's easily my second favorite Beatle. Then George, then Ringo. I like George's stuff. I thought a lot of George's stuff sounded very similar, but they all had distinctive voices. When my son was quite young, I would ask him to pick out which Beatle is that. And I always thought, don't you think? I always thought it was easy picking out which Beatles sang, which song. I mean, whatever song they sang is usually the one they wrote. But some people, it was a little harder. My bucket list would also be meeting and interviewing Paul McCartney, though I don't think that's ever going to happen. Let me just read you the list that we just had a while ago about the most surprising rock deaths. Freddie Mercury is at number 1, and he was 45, died in 91. Tom Petty, it's not our list, it's just a ranker list. Tom Petty died in 2017. He's number 2. Jimi Hendrix, he was 27. Of course, one of the most famous people from the 27 Club. He died in 1970, 27. Buddy Holly, 22 in 1959, plane crash, of course. Bob Marley, age 36, 1981. Kurt Cobain was 27. Man, that notorious 27 Club. I still say that's just a coincidence, but there's going to be an age. There's going to be one age where a lot of rockers pass away on. There's always going to be one, and sometimes it's a little bit more than the usual amount of people dying at that age. And there was a lot. Died in 1994 at the age of 27, Kurt Cobain. David Bowie died in 2016. Glenn Frey as well, remember? John Lennon, we're talking about tonight. He passed in 1980. He was 40 years old. What would he have done? He was happy to be recording again. Remember, Milk and Honey and the other releases that came after Double Fantasy, they had enough material in the can that they were able to, but my point is not that they had music in the can as much as he was being very prolific at the time. He wanted to record a lot more stuff, which was encouraging. But also on the list, Jim Morrison comes after John Lennon, as I mentioned a while ago. He was 27, died in 71. Prince died in 2016. Stevie Ray Vaughan was very young, 35. Died in 1990. Chris Cornell, 52, 2017. And Elvis, 1977 at 42. My biggest faux pas in music, and I've said this many times on my channels, is my mother. My mother was very sad in the kitchen, and I said, why are you sad? She said, Elvis died. And I went, who cares? And it's just a stupid, ignorant 17-year-old thing to say. I was just a real heavy rocker at the time. And it was stupid for me to say that. And since then, I've educated myself very well in Elvis music. Paulo, nice to have you on. That killing was weird. The guy got his autograph that day. Yeah, we've all seen that picture. Was more going on? I don't know. He was mentally. Mark David Chapman was mentally ill. He's apologized several times, but he's never going to get out of jail because if he does, they're saying it's for his own safety. Big Okie. John wasn't the easiest person to love. That's true. He could be he could be. Paulo, Brad Delp was a really hard one for me. Brad Delp was in the top 5 for me. And there are days where I just feel Brad's right behind John Lennon. It changes though for me. But Brad's death was, and the way he did it with the hibachi barbecue and the circumstances surrounding it, where he supposedly had filmed his, my hair is just crazy, filmed his girlfriend's sister. If that happens, it was just a bad decision, and he was embarrassed, and it just crushed me. Because as a vocalist, at least in record, I know that we just released that Boston video on this channel a little while ago, and a lot of people were saying, wow, they weren't great in concert. I had a lot of bootlegs. They didn't sound bad to me, but I wasn't there. Christopher says, Jerry Garcia was kind of a shocker for most. I was 14 at the time. Alex Knight, my friend Alex. John was great at the singer-songwriter confessional lyric stuff. Yeah, very true. Louis says, Jerry Garcia was a huge shock for me. I was only 35 years old. And Fred, the drummer, the 27 Club is a coincidence. Freddie's passing hit me hard. Also, Glenn Fry. Yeah, I talked to Glenn's brother, Alan Fry, on a regular basis. And it's cool, and I've told this story so many times, so sorry. He tells me about when his mother would call radio stations to get the Eagles played on radio stations, which when you think about it, right? Because in the beginning they were just guys in the band. They're really still just guys in the band. But when Glenn passed away, I don't think a lot of people knew he was sick. Neil Peart's the same thing. David Bowie, very similar. George Michael on Christmas Day, the announcement, very similar. Where we go, what? We didn't even know he was sick. Like, especially with Neil Peart. It's look at, I can't even find the words. Neil Peart just was right out of left field. See some of your comments. Oscar Stern. Yeah, that was on the Android phone when I plugged my Ion All-Star guitar into my amp. Yeah, the 27 Club, I know conspiracy theories are juicy. I'm so not a conspiracy theorist at all. Sometimes things are just coincidences, weird. Sometimes things can't be explained. Excuse me. These lights are very bright. They're very, very bright on me. So I'm thinking of doing a thing tonight featuring interviews that I have with Bernie Ledden. He wasn't on Hotel California, but it's the anniversary of Hotel California, 1976. And but I asked him, what would Hotel California have sounded like if you were still in the band? And he kind of says, well, that's a cute question. I have an interview with, quite a long interview with Randy Meisner, Glenn Fry's songwriting partner, Jack Temchin. Who else? I've got a few. Alan Fry, Glenn Fry's brother, talking about Hotel California. And there's Henry Diltz. I have an interview with him, and Henry was the photographer for the first album and the second album. I did Desperado. Remember when Jackson Browne, J. Lee Souther were there? I'm going off topic a little bit, sorry. But so we're going to do a thing on Hotel California in about an hour. But I just wanted to come on here and, a little tip of the hat for John Lennon. As I mentioned, and a lot of you probably did, and please share your stories. I went out and bought, I think at the time, I always guess at this, I bought the early Beatles albums. I already had, when they started changing the Revolver, Rubber Soul, Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, Let It Be, the White Album, Abbey Road. Those were my favorite, the more groovy part of the Beatles. But then I went back and bought the earlier albums and even some interview pressings and, did a lot of that stuff. You know why I'm my stomach's going crazy? I went off bread. I did the keto diet for 2 weeks, and I had 2 pieces of bread tonight. I went, oh my God. Crazy. So, Oscar, yes. Pooh Bear Santee. I'm fairly certain it's been mentioned. Today is James Douglas Morrison's birthday. Jim Morrison's birthday. I adore him. Jimmy. I used to always call him Jimmy Morrison, and my friends would say, and Danny McCafferty, the two dead lead singers, Dan McCafferty of Nazareth, but then Pete Agnew said, oh, people call him Danny. The press usually doesn't, but so there you go. Fred C. Drummer, Don Felder should be in the Eagles today, especially if they're doing Hotel California too. Agreed, but too much has happened. Oh, Morrow C., Brad Delp, Jim Croce, yeah. Jim's son, who's blind, legally blind, does some good music and looks like his dad. I remember, what was it, 73? Jim Croce died? Just a shocker, but nothing nothing really hit me like nothing hit me like John Lennon. That was just a kooky one. So guys, I wanted to come on here just for a little bit to talk about John, talk about that night, talk about the shock, Christopher Cruz. It's ironic that some of these musicians made certain statements almost as if they knew they didn't have long. In John Lennon's case, while there is life, there is hope. Sometimes, I don't know. I mean, the yookity spookity stuff, I went through years of looking for meaning in a lot of things. I think we all do, right? It's a normal part of life. I just had an interview with an actress. She's not that well known, but very, very interesting. How she kind of looks at everything as, you know, we're just like rocks in the sky, just bouncing around. Hold on. Oh, I have a little picture of myself down here. That is so weird. Oh yeah, Scout Durwood. That's her name. Amazing actress. She's very big, very good on that fourth wall of looking at the camera and talking to the camera. And she's just released some new music, which we'll present to you in the next little while. Thanks, John. Barry Gidley, Fred C. Drummer. Enjoy your videos, John. Be well. Thank you. We're going to come on in about an hour. We're going to celebrate Hotel California with interviews from Henry Diltz, who was the first Eagles photographer, Alan Fry, who's Glenn Fry's brother, Bernie Ledden, who was not on Hotel California, but I asked him what it would sound like if he was, Randy Meisner, and Jack Temchin, who was Glenn Fry's songwriting partner. So we're going to have all those people on our Happy Birthday Hotel California. So some good things happen on December 8th. Coming up in about an hour. Take good care of yourself, guys. I love you. Thank you for hanging. If you want to support the channel, there's PayPal. You can make a donation. It's right in the description, or you can join our Patreon and get early access to our videos. Take care.